Healthcare.
Morning, this is Radio Jackie, broadcasting to Southwest London on 227 metres medium wave.
This is Alice's Restaurant, 90.4 megahertz, and we're here to bring you the very best in rock music.
You're in tune with Lou the Duke here on Radio City. If you want to write...
Anyway, welcome to MAR on 266 metres medium wave, the sound of the Northwest.
It's a Thameside radio on 90.2 megahertz VHF.
Hi and welcome to the very first Pirates of the Airwaves podcast. My name is Mark Wakely and I'm one of the people behind the land-based pirate radio of the 70s and 80s Facebook group. In these podcasts, I'm going to chat to some of the people who were involved in pirate radio of the 1970s and 1980s about their time in this secret but also not so secret world. If you were one of those rebels and you want to tell the world about how you changed the face of radio in the UK, or just spent a wet Sunday afternoon in a field looking out for the Post Office, Telecom or the DTI, delete where applicable, or just have a comment about the pod, then get in touch. You can email us at piratepod7080@gmail.com. That's piratepod7080@gmail.com. Or you can leave a comment on the Facebook group page. And before I go any further, let me thank the good people at thepiratearchive.net and amfm.org.uk for their help in the production of the podcast. Right, on to our first guest. A transmitter builder extraordinaire, presenter and founder of London Music Radio 94.4. To listeners and others, he was Chris Miles, but to his mum, he's Pyers Easton. So, let's get into the conversation. Welcome to the podcast. Today, we have, some would say, a pirate radio legend from the 70s and 80s, a man who put on and kept on an awful lot of radio stations during that period, a transmitter builder extraordinaire, Pyers Easton. Hi, Pyers.
Hello. Hello, pleased to be with you. How are you doing? I'm
fine. I'm very well, thank you. It's nice to see you again after all these years as well, because we can actually see each other. Although you can't see us, we can see each other.
I think we've both aged a bit since we last saw each other, but...
Well, I think we could describe ourselves now as silver foxes.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take that as a compliment.
Well, my wife seems to think it is, so that's good enough for me. The first thing I really wanted to ask you is, when did you first become aware of pirate radio as opposed to just radio? When did pirate radio become a thing for you?
Oh, well, actually, I do remember that. That's luckily, so there's a lot of things I don't remember from that era, but I was a kid in the car driving with my father was driving, and it had I remember it had a valve car radio in it. It was a very, very old car that my father had. And we were kind of tuning around, and we found some, I was tuning around and found some music, and then it was Radio Caroline. This would have been the Me Amigo days. This would have probably been early 70s sometime, and I didn't really know what it was, and I remember my father telling me all about it, that it was broadcasting from a boat, and this just fascinated me. I just thought, so this is like an illegal radio station, basically, like pirates, literally. So yeah, it just really, really grabbed me, and I became fascinated by it. And I remember putting a long wire aerial out my bedroom and connecting it up to a really old radiogram that my mum and dad bought from an auction, and just listening extensively to Radio Caroline. That was my first experience of pirate radio.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's probably my first experience as well, listening a little bit later on than you, probably about 1977, 78. And I was talking to my brother about something. He said, oh, there's a pirate radio station still broadcasting, don't you? And again, the Caroline days on the Me Amigo. 319, I think, was the frequency I first tuned to listen to them. On an old Bush radio, an old Bakelite Bush radio.
Yeah, I used to love listening to Tom Anderson. He was my favourite DJ on there, who I later became very good friends with, and still are good friends with. So,
were you already into electronics and that sort of thing at the time, or was that something that developed because of your interest in the radio?
I was already interested in electronics, to be honest, but the actual radio bit hadn't entered my sort of life until then. I I used to, when I was about 5 or 6, I used to collect torches, and I used to sort of take them apart and try and put them back together. And then I remember I went into my father took me to Cambridge for some reason. I can't remember, a family day out, and I remember finding a Tandy shop in Cambridge. Tandy, of course, Radio Shack for any US listeners. And they had all these components you could buy. And I remember I bought like a photo cell and various other bits and pieces, and I started experimenting with electronics probably when I was sort of 7 or thereabouts. And I just became fascinated with all things electronics. But it really wasn't until I had Radio Caroline at that point that I then became interested in radio. And then I suppose the next sort of eureka moment, a very, very good friend of mine who was a few years older, who I'm still in touch with, he was into electronics, and he had bought a little transmitter kit from Exchange and Mart magazine, which is like you may remember, it was in the days before the internet, it was where you would sort of buy and sell things, and they had they used to have a section of where you could buy little kits. And I remember I had a little portable radio on VHF, and he was talking to a microphone, and I walked off, and I could still hear him like several hundred meters away, and I just thought, oh, this is it. That was just like a light bulb went on at that point.
Yeah, it's I know what you mean. It's that thing of just being disconnected from the voice, but still being connected to the whole thing as well. It's quite a weird sensation. I think we all probably went through that. And the first first proper working transmitter you ever built? Well,
it would probably have been about that time. I think I bought one of those kits. And this was before I was aware of land-based pirate radio. So I'm guessing it would have been 76 or thereabouts. I was about 11. And I bought one of the kits, basically. And I remember it had the oscillator was a BF194 transistor. I even remember that. And it had an etched, the oscillator, the inductor for the oscillator was actually printed on the board. I remember that. And it was very, very basic, and the audio quality wasn't great. So I built one of those, and I used to plug. I had like a tape recorder and a record player, and I built a sort of very basic. I think it was like a passive mixer that I could fade between the two, and I could put a microphone into the tape recorder, and I used to like broadcast to my parents, literally downstairs. They'd tune in on the radio. That was it. And then I started copying this kit. I realized that I could etch, and I used to get ferric chloride, which was horrendously dangerous stuff. And I probably shouldn't have been messing around with it at that age. But I literally, with longhand, I would sort of draw out onto copper-clad boards this design. I started making bug transmitters that I used to sell to my mates at school for a few pounds, and they were probably using to bug their parents, and probably, goodness only knows what trouble I got people into with that. But
that's a bit worrying. But so that's how you sort of started doing it. So it's always been transistors and solid state, basically, for you. You were never a valve transmitter person.
No, I kind of, although I did end up doing some stuff with valves later on, but no, it was always transistors. And but at that time, as I say, I was using them for bug transmitters, and it was a few milliwatts. So, I would literally be broadcasting just to the neighbours and my parents downstairs, and it was, probably dreadful. I mean, I was never a particularly good broadcaster, to be fair, but good. Thankfully, there's no recordings of that. The big, the sort of the next eureka moment was, I think as I always used to do, I used to listen to the top 20 on Radio 1 / Radio 2, which was broadcasting obviously down at the bottom end of the dial, 88 to 91 or whatever they say. And that finished, and I was tuning back up to Capital, and I just stopped at this radio station on 90.2, which you can probably guess what it was. It was Thameside Radio. And it was, I think it was either their first broadcast or their second. I mean, literally, it was very, very early on. So that was, I think, 1977. And I really had no idea what it was. I thought, well, how come, that radio station isn't in the Radio Times, or, and I didn't, I knew about Caroline, but, I thought, well, the only reason they could do that was because they were on a ship. I had I was only a kid, the concept that somebody would actually be able to broadcast over London from from a hilltop or the top of a building just hadn't occurred to me.
I had a similar experience, just tuning round on a Sunday morning, I think Sunday lunchtime. And the first thing I ever heard was North London Radio and then Radio Amy. And I thought, how are these people broadcast? They must have special licenses so they can broadcast on a Sunday. It must be something that you're allowed to do. And then I spoke to Lawrence. You remember Lawrence? And he said, oh, no, these are pirate radio stations. He lived down the road to me. He lived about 10 houses down the road to me. And he said, oh, no, these are pirate radio stations. And that's how I first, so the same as you, purely by accident, found these things. And obviously your interest develops from there. So what about your first ever proper station with a name and all the other stuff?
Well, after hearing Thameside, I think after a while I would listen to it every week, and I kind of got a feeling about what was going on, but I didn't really know anybody. I didn't have anybody 10 houses down the street to ask about it, but I decided I wanted to start making bigger transmitters and things, and I somehow, I think I went to the library and found some circuit diagrams for amateur equipment, and I thought, well, I can adapt that to another frequency. And I remember I was in it's sort of another eureka moment. I was in Henry's, which was one of the many shops in the Edgware Road that sold components, surplus components, things like that, and I was buying some smoothing capacitors, I think, and heat sinks, and there was a chap in there who started talking to me. He was a bit older than me, and I was, I guess, I don't know, 13 or 14 at the time, maybe, about 14, I'd say. And he said, "Oh, what are you doing with those?" And it turns out that he knew the people from Radio Free London. And literally, I went from Edgware Road. I mean, at that age, it sounds crazy now, actually. I mean, I'm not sure I'd be happy with my kids at 14 years old, just letting them go off and buy components to build transmitters and disappear for the day. But I ended up going back on the train with him to Deptford somewhere, or Bromley, I think it was. And some of the guys from Radio Free London came round. There was a guy called Andy Allman, who became a really good friend of mine as well. And he was one of the sort of well-known presenters on there. And I remember he scribbled out some at this guy called Chris's house, who was the guy I met in Henry's. He scribbled out a diagram for a transmitter, and just off the top of his head, I thought, well, this is amazing. And so then I started to, that's when I kind of started to make proper transmitters. And actually, sorry, I've gone a bit off track here. The question was, when was the first broadcast? I think probably I started building those transmitters, and I used to live between London and a place in Northamptonshire near Kettering, sort of Thrapston way, a little village. And at the weekends and holidays, we'd be there, and I'd only be in London just during the week for school. And I started a radio station there, originally with just a couple of watts, I think it was, but it eventually got up to about 40 or 50 watts, sticking an air out my bedroom window on a long pole. That's called Nen Valley Radio, because that was the area. And I think you know it as well, because I think you lived in that area for a while.
I do, yes. I used to live over there as well. So
I don't know if anybody listened. Well, actually, I do know that it was listened to, because many years later I bumped into some people from Hereward Radio, which I remember when that started up from Peterborough. They actually, I met somebody who was actually one of the launch presenters there, and he'd said that they'd been listening to it in the control room and they'd heard it. So, so at least somebody was listening. But I remember putting out phone numbers and things, and I only got like maybe one or two phone calls over months. But I had fun with my mates in the village, and that's kind of that was really the start of it.
Well, it's quite a rural area, so you probably were broadcasting to an awful lot of fields and trees and wetland, I should think.
Yeah, well, things went to a completely different level. Then I decided, I suppose, because having worshipped Caroline, and then started worshipping Thameside, I suppose, because they were the first ones that I heard. I thought, well, I can do this. I started broadcasting from the roof of my house in London, and then a mate of mine from school, one of my school friends, lived in a house that was about 7 stories high around the corner. This was in near Gloucester Road in London. He let me in the door, and I managed to find a way out onto the roof, and I put a transmitter up there. And that was, I think that was the point when I started using the name London Music Radio, because Andy Allman, who was my friend, and the other people I knew from Radio Free London had said that there'd been a station with that name, but it was fairly long defunct. And I think Andy, maybe Andy was involved, or Stuart Vaughan, had been involved, and I'd sort of met him. And anyway, I was given the nod that they didn't mind if I used the name. Maybe somebody will listen to this and correct me, but I'm pretty sure that I spoke to some people and they said, "Oh, you can use that." I mean, I liked it. LMR, London Music Radio. It sounded good. So that's kind of when I kind of started off. But even then, I was only broadcasting to a small part of London. But my word, did we get response then? I used to give out my home number actually where I was broadcasting from, which was madness. Although I was linking to this place around the corner, it was pretty crazy giving out the number.
It wouldn't have taken the DTI much to work out where it was coming from.
No, but astonishingly, they never did come round.
Well, that's the record you voted number 3 in last week's new release spot, and that was Malcolm McLaren and Double Dutch. In fact, I was reading during the week that Mr. McLaren is being sued by an African record publishing company, saying that that record is actually ripping off some African tribal tunes. So there you go. You're not even safe if you copy an African tune. I wonder what it would be like if it was Australian or something. Probably they'd still get you then. So Malcolm McLaren is no doubt going to enjoy the publicity that's going to surround him being prosecuted for that. Still, it's London Music Radio 94.4 megahertz VHF, and it's the Chris Marr Show right through till 9 o'clock tonight. And at the moment, I'm playing you the top 3 records from last week's new release spot, as voted by you. And don't forget to vote in this week's new release spot. The lines are open at this very moment. 3-4.
I think that's the first time I became aware of you, because as you know, I was part of the Phoenix Radio and Alice's Restaurant and Radio Comsat group over on the Essex borders. And that's when I first became aware of you. And I also became friends with Mark Desani, of course, who I know you were involved with Radio Zodiac and stuff like that. And I do remember coming round to the flat in Holloway. Do you remember the flat in Holloway?
Yeah. Well, funnily enough, actually, that very nicely dovetails into the next eureka moment for me, which was I'd heard through some of the people that I knew that Mark Desani had some keys, some FB keys, Fire Brigade keys for getting on tower blocks, and
which you can now buy on eBay, bizarrely.
Can you really?
Yes.
Do they still exist? I'd have thought they'd have got the security a bit.
I think the places that have them you can buy on eBay,
right.
but
that's
like you say, they're probably not very relevant now because they are so easily available. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so I remember going round to Mark's flat in Holloway, and I don't think he even charged me. He gave me the keys to go and get cut, and I think I went round the corner and got some copies cut and took them back to him, and then we started chatting, and then that's how I then got involved with him, and by that point I was doing this London Music Radio thing. I was putting it on tower blocks at near between Edgware Road and near Trellick Tower. Actually, I wasn't actually up Trellick Tower because at that point I didn't have the keys to get up. Then that's where Thameside were. But there was some tower blocks near Royal Oak Station, near Paddington, basically. You see, I still see them when I go into Paddington. For many, many years, the aerial that I put up there was there. And when I used to drive in on the West Road, I'd see the aerial probably up for about 10 years after I stopped using it. But yes, anyway, so I
But if people don't know the area, it's near where Grenville Tower was, isn't it? That sort of vicinity.
Yeah.
Sort of Ladbroke Grovey.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I mean, basically just behind Paddington Station. So, I mean, they weren't the best tower blocks, they weren't the highest, but I covered most of sort of West London and North London and bits of South London, and I was getting reports from, way out in the sticks. At that point, I was running about 40 or 50 watt transmitters. But yeah, then I became more and more friendly with Mark Desani. Roger Vosine was his name on air, which probably a lot of people listening will know, which I always thought was a fantastic name, probably one of the best radio names ever, in my opinion. But so we decided that we would pool our resources, and we would do radio, my station on a Saturday night, LMR, London Music Radio, and then Radio Zodiac on a Sunday using the same equipment. And originally it was all on tape, so we'd put the transmitter on air with my radio station on the Saturday, and then we'd go back up there the next day with another tape and put it back on air. And it was rigged so that when the tape ran out, the transmitter turned off, basically. So.
Oh right, so it was like you had an automatic switch off system and that sort of thing. So when did you start doing live shows linked to tower blocks? Because I know that was something that I used to think it was magic as far as I was concerned. I was still in the forest using tape recorders on medium wave at that time. And then there's these people on FM who've got automatic transmitters and are linking live from studio. So when did that sort of thing start?
Gosh, that would have probably been in the back end of 1981 or early 1982. Through my friends from Radio Free London and just generally the network of pirates, we started. At that point, I didn't even have a car, but I had friends who were older with cars who were involved with radio. We used to go to amateur radio rallies, as they were called, which was where they were like component, where you could buy electronic components and all kinds of other paraphernalia for RF, basically. And I think I went to one at Epsom Downs, the racetrack there. That was one of the good ones. And I bought a load of Pi pocket phone boards. These were UHF radios used by the police that had, by that stage had been fairly long retired, and they had a separate transmitter and receiver, and I could buy these boards. They were in the UHF band. And I modified those to work at the bottom of the TV band at about 470, 471 megahertz thereabouts, which is the bottom of Channel 21 TV in Europe. And there was nothing in London. There was nothing on Channel 21, so I just used to use those frequencies. And that was obviously a revolution, when, although I'd already done some live broadcasts going back to when was using my mate's place around the corner. That was just using an FM link. I had just an FM radio. So I was up at like 108 or something receiving that. And, I think I had a Vox on it or something, so that when it came up with audio, it would turn the transmitter on. So I had already done live broadcasting. It wasn't really up to the job of going miles to a tower block, which is why I started off then again with tapes before going back to live. But yeah, certainly once I got the hang of building links, it all became very, very interesting.
I did a couple of bits for Zodiac from the flat in Holloway. And I think you're on a link there because I remember doing a phone-in show for some reason. I think it was a case of holding the phone near the microphone and talking so that people could hear what the person who I was talking to. I mean, I've got a hybrid thing in here now, so I don't have to worry about that. But I remember that very well. I think it was probably a bank holiday or a Christmas or something where they were broadcasting for a long period of time, and he was just looking for people to fill hours, I think, at the time.
Yeah. Well, I was probably there. I mean, I used to pretty much live for the weekend at that place in Holloway. 6073908 was the name. It was the phone number there, and again, actually, yeah, it's just dawned on me. We were crazy because we were actually using the phone number that was at the studio,
at the flat.
Yeah, and we just used that for quite a while, for at least a year. We were broadcasting every weekend. I mean, that's
and they never put two and two together and came up with.
I know it is actually incredible when you think about it. I think we obviously felt invincible,
Yeah, you were still linking to a transmitter somewhere else, thinking we're doing it right here.
We had a big TV, a big anti-interference TV aerial for the transmit, and we poked it out. Well, it was pointing through his window at Holloway. It was he was on the sort of top floor. It was only like 3 or 4 floors high, but you could see across to these tower blocks at Swiss Cottage that we were using.
That's right. I remember that.
Fell at just some tower blocks off Fellows Road. They're obviously all still there, and it still brings back memories when I go near them. It was line of sight. So I used to fire through his big He had these big windows, so the RF would just go straight through the glass, and we'd pick it up on the tower block, and we used to broadcast. So we'd do my broadcast on Saturday night, and then turn it off, and the transmitter would go off, because when you turn the link off, the transmitter would go off as well, and then just turn it on again the next day for Zodiac. I must admit, look. Sorry,
I was going to say it was 94.4, wasn't it, in those days?
Yes, it was. Yeah. I mean, thinking back, really, I've got some tape. There are some tapes out there. I mean, some of the stuff we did on Saturday night, it got to be a bit fun. I mean, I had other people involved. There was Chris England got involved, and who would have been on Radio Amy, I think you mentioned earlier.
He also did some stuff on Comsat as well for a while, but
did he?
My listeners didn't like it very much.
No, he's. I mean, I sort of occasionally have contact with him. He's certainly an opinionated chap.
And the other station I was involved with, in which I know you were involved as well, was Radio Shoestring as well. He was on that when I was on that.
He certainly was. Oh yeah. Well, that's fast forwarding to.
Yes. Let's move on. So we've done LMR and Zodiac. So what did you do next? So that you become then a pirate radio transmitter builder, really, don't you? For hire.
Yeah, I think, I was obsessed with keeping my station on the air, and every Saturday from, I think the first proper LMR broadcast was June 1981, until sometime in early 1984. That's when LMR was on. But I'd got to meet various other people who wanted transmitters, and I started building transmitters for people and making money. So at the age of sort of 15 or 16, I was starting to make a fair bit of money out of selling transmitters to other people. One of the people I met was a guy called Chris Stewart, who wanted to set up Horizon Radio. And I started, I was making transmitters for him, and he built really cool studios. I mean, I'd not seen anything like it before in pirate radio. He built studios like, they were sort of like professional studios, but they were hidden in sort of the roof cavities of like council blocks in South London, and council buildings. And I remember one of them you had to get through by going out of a window and walking along this parapet, sort of 50 or 60 feet up in the air, and then going in through another window.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been on that station.
That was an interesting station. So that's kind of how I got involved with that. Then, Shoestring was an interesting one.
Tell the story about that, because I love that story when you're at Wood Green. Oh yeah.
I at this point I was obviously doing quite a lot of broadcasting, and I was helping Horizon and everything. And I was with my girlfriend at the time. We were living in Chingford, and we went for went shopping at Wood Green shopping centre, and there was this radio station broadcasting in there, and I heard these voices. I thought, well, this sounds very professional. And we went to this booth where they were broadcasting from. They were just going out over this terrible quality PA that they had in Wood Green. And I got chatting to the guys there, and I said, told them about what I was doing. They said, we really, really want to get a transmitter. We want to do a pirate station. And the two guys in there was Mitch Johnson, who later went on to sort of big things on,
He's now Showbiz Mitch on radio too.
He's Showbiz Mitch. I'm still friends with him. And the other guy was Paul McKenna, who of course became famous for a lot more than just radio.
Look into my eyes, don't look around my eyes, look into my eyes, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So
the guy I knew from that was, do you remember Greg Pyers?
Yes, I do indeed. Yes. Well, they then introduced me to Greg and Gary King.
Gary King, yeah.
Yeah, and Gary sang all their jingles. Anyway, so they introduced me to Greg Pyers, and I built them this transmitter that was, I think, probably 100 watts or thereabouts. And I remember, first of all, it was coming from Greg Pyers' house, and he'd built a really nice studio in his spare bedroom, and it was really professional. And I heard what Paul McKenna and Mitch Johnson were doing, and the sort of the quality of their production and their voices. It was better than anything else that was on the radio. Well, it wasn't it wasn't like matching what was on the radio. It was like better.
Shoestring FM. Doing it all just for you. The best music we will bring. FM 102.5. Radio Shoestring.
Broadcasting on 102.5 FM. This is Radio Shoestring. Serving Loughton, Leytonstone, Wood Green and Southgate. With music, news, local, national and international. And everything that matters in the Shoestring area. Eastside Community Radio. Radio Shoestring is East London's voice from Walthamstow.
And I just thought, well, this is something really special. I remember we put this huge aerial out of Greg's roof. I think we moved a tile or something, and we had these slot together masts. Each one was like 6 foot long, so we just kept adding and adding and adding. And it was, I think they called it Sputnik. This thing ended up being about, 30 or 40 feet sticking out the roof, and it was very precarious. And so, that's where Shoestring started.
I was on Shoestring for a bit, and I broadcast from 3 studios all together. They had one, do you remember the one at Forest Road next to the YMCA? Were you involved in those days?
Yes, I do. Yeah, the one at down the back of the YMCA,
and
wasn't
then
it?
The next one, I think, was probably at the back of a shop at St James's Street, at the bottom end of Walthamstow High Street. And then the third one I remember was in his house. So I don't know where that fits in, because I think you were involved well before I was.
Well, I mean, when it started off, it was a proper pirate, but I mean, it was always a pirate. But at some point during Shoestring's lifetime, it became obvious that the DTI, as it was then, who were people raiding the stations, were not actually allowed to take your equipment away, and that was a period of time before the Broadcasting Act came in 1984. I think there was a period of about a year or so where all these stations popped up, and there was basically nothing that the DTI could do, and they were absolutely fuming about this.
Yeah,
because obviously they they wanted to do their job and take these stations off the air, but the Wireless Telegraphy Act 1949 just didn't actually. I can't remember who it was. Somebody found.
It was a loophole, wasn't there?
A loophole.
I think the guys at Radio Jackie found a loophole, didn't they? Or something
I think it was Jackie. I think you're right. Yeah.
Because it wasn't a case that they could come and test and inspect the equipment, but couldn't confiscate it.
Inspect and test, exactly. And it basically, they were powerless. They were impotent, really. And that was lovely to see. The people like Eric Gotts and Brian Holder turning up, and literally, it was like, oh, here's another lot that know the law, and they would just. Bugger off.
Well, one of the people I hope to be talking to on the podcast in the future is Danny Dipole. You remember Danny?
I do, yes.
Yeah, and I know he was at Shoestring the day they got raided at Forest Road. I think they were at the time, and he's got great. I won't tell you the story now because Danny tells it so much better. But it's a very funny story about the DCI being very frustrated at the time about the fact they couldn't take this 24-hour station off the air.
Well, I look forward to hearing that on a future podcast. But actually, it just it reminds me of another an episode actually which predates that slightly. This is back when pirates were pirates and were getting raided. Again, at Mark Designer's flat in Holloway, he was tuning his radio as he would always do on a Sunday morning, and his radio, for some reason, it went slightly off the bottom of the VHF spectrum, and he basically found the DTI's comms system, and suddenly realised we were listening to Eric Gotts and Brian Holder and all of these famous sort of infamous DTI people actually talking about who they were going to raid next. So we started being able to know, when they were coming after us, we'd turn off, and then it got around to other people. I think the mistake was made of informing other people, and then all the radio, all the pirates were listening into the DTI comms, and I think then it then became clear that the DTI realised they were being listened to, and then they would deliberately put out false information and hear the radio stations go off air suddenly when they would mention them, and so that was that was good for a while.
But at the beginning of that, could you hear them getting annoyed that the stations were going off when they didn't realise they were being listened to? It must have been a great thing to listen to.
It was. Yeah. I mean, it was just gold, absolute gold. I'm not sure if any recordings exist of it. Perhaps. I mean, I know the guys at Jackie and all of the pirates were using it. It just it became just.
Anyone listening to this who's got any recordings of those, we'd love to hear that. That would just be tremendous. We could do a whole episode on that. Right then, I've written a few things down here because obviously I'm aware of your past. I've known you for quite a long time. And what I wanted to know is, who did you build for, mainly? That was one of the things. There's that great piece of video on YouTube of you sitting in I don't know whether you're in a basement or in your attic or whatever, and a guy's interviewing you. He says, so what do you do for a living? You go, I make pirate radio transmitters.
Yeah, well, that at that point, I'd set up. I became the engineer for London Greek Radio. Okay. Having worked for some of the other Greek stations, London Greek Radio was the big one in the sort of Holloway area, broadcasting to the large Greek community around that part of the world. And I was one of the owners of LGR, George Power, or George Heracleus, who sadly passed away a few years ago. But he was one of the owners, and he owned a row of 3 houses in the sort of Hornsey area, and he gave me the top flat there and said, well, we'll put you in there. You build our transmitters, and they were paying me a few £100 a week to just be their engineer. That it was at that point, I think that TV program was made, and they were getting raided almost every day. So I was building quite a lot of transmitters, and then I got a friend of mine involved who was also an engineer, and he came in and he sort of moved into the same flat. And then we just started knocking out transmitters for lots. When you say, hey, who did I build for? It's very hard to remember. I mean, there was so many stations, mostly dance music stations.
Yeah, so the Kisses and Solars and Horizons and people
Kiss, obviously, that's a kind of another episode in my career. George Power was good friends with Gordon Mack. And I remember they came round to the flat, and where I had my transmitter workshop, and they had this idea. And Gordon had this vision of doing Kiss FM, because I think he'd heard Kiss FM in LA, and he wanted to do this new station for London that was a dance station, but like no other. This would be doing things like, I mean, it just sounds very obvious now, but doing like live mixing on air and stuff like that, because nobody was doing that. On the radio, and it sounded like such a cool thing. So we sort of set up in partnership to do this, and my George would put the money in, and I think Gordon would arrange all that. He was a broadcaster, and he got all the people together, and he was still is a great people person. He was really good at bringing in lots of good people, and I just kept the thing on air, that ran for a few years. Actually, I was involved with that right up until about 1988 from when it started, which would have been about 1985.
Yeah. And were you involved in that whole scene up at Crystal Palace where there was, roofs all along the row of there with loads of masts and everybody was broadcasting from the top of Sydenham Hill?
Well, yes, through Horizon. The timelines of all this get a bit blurred. I mean, the Kiss thing that I was just talking about, that was from about 1985, and by that point, obviously, it had gone back to being pirates. The Broadcasting Act had come in, but yeah, during the period where people could broadcast without actual fear of having their equipment taken away, there was that row of transmitters up at Crystal Palace. I mean, my main involvement there was with Horizon and Chris Stewart, and Horizon was probably the most successful in terms of money making. I remember Chris Stewart showing me under his sofa. I think he said there was about 60 or 70 grand in cash from advertisers. Literally, and it was he lifted up the cushion, the cushions on his sofa, and there were wads of cash. So. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't seeing that much, but I was doing all right. I was doing lots of work for lots of stations.
It's incredible to think that that's what it developed into from me running around the forest with some wire and a old valve transmitter, broadcasting in North and East London, to that kind of huge business setup. But I suppose people see, the possibilities there. So, how many transmitters do you think you've built? How many pirate transmitters?
Oh my God,
roughly.
I would have absolutely no idea. I mean, hundreds. I mean, I would have said hundreds. Yeah, over the years. Not for a very long time. Although I sometimes have dreams of where I'm back on the air at a pirate station. Then I sort of wake up in the morning. I find myself looking online, and you can buy these 1,500 watt FM amplifiers now for like 250 quid or something. It's just madness. So yeah, if I were doing it now, it would be so easy. But no, I mean, back in those days, it was a lot, like hundreds. I really couldn't even hazard a guess.
And then, so we come to the end of the pirate era. You're the end of your pirate era. What's the nenext move for Pyers? Where do you go from there?
Well, I was, as I said, I was doing very well. I was in this house in Hornsey, and the end. There's a very clear end for me with Pirates. There was this station who I can't remember the name, but probably best left nameless. But I knew them. I knew the guys quite well. But I think they were kind of yardy types, and I was building their transmitters, but I was also building one for their rivals, building transmitters for their rivals. And this guy turned up who I'd known quite well and got on quite well with. And, he was telling me I shouldn't build transmitters for him. Next thing I know, he pulls a knife out. I mean, he didn't actually attack me with it, but he was just holding his knife. And I said to him, hey, what are you doing? I said, look, can't we just talk about it? And he said, I'm sorry. He said, it's just a habit of mine. And that at that point, because my girlfriend was asleep, next in the room next door, I thought, this is it. I can't. I'm not doing this anymore. This would have been about 1988.
So well after things like DBC and stuff like that.
Rebel. Oh yeah.
Wow, I can understand why you got out of it at that point.
And I just said I want to focus on legal radio because I was building links and I'd already started selling links to commercial radio. I think what was the name of the station? Guildford.
Oh, County Sound.
County Sound. That's it. Well done. Sorry, my memory is a bit hazy.
No, it's all right.
I built some links I built some links for them, and I thought, well, I want to just move away from pirates. And I remember having a word with Gordon from KISS, which was the last pirate I was working with. I said, look, I'll carry on for a while, but I said, can you try and find somebody else because I just want to get out of it. And at that point, there were 4 of us involved with 4 kind of joint owners of KISS. Tosca, myself, Gordon, and George, and obviously it was devastating to them because they had to find somebody, and in the end it was Martin Spencer and Lawrence who I kind of introduced them to Gordon, and they carried on. And I remember I think I was paid £1,000 or something for my quarter share of KISS, which of course then 2 years later got a license and was worth millions.
Yes, they bought by again, weren't they?
It's just the way it goes. Yeah, just the way it goes. If I'd have hung on a bit, I'd have. But
so you weren't one of the people involved in putting KISS on the air when they became legal, then?
Not really. My Andy Howard, who was my business partner, who we were doing building transmitters together, who also sadly passed away about 14 years ago. He and I had set up this company called Sound Broadcast Services, SBS, and he did some work for them. He ended up becoming their chief engineer for a while. But no, by that stage, they were kind of, they were working with Martin and Lawrence, and they with another guy put all the studios and stuff together back in the Holloway Road when KISS started. But I still kept in touch with Gordon, and it was there were no hard feelings. I mean, I just felt that I couldn't. That was the end. I just couldn't be involved with pirates because the way it was going, it was just violence. And I also had no idea at that point that the pirates were going to start getting legalized left, right, and center in a couple of years' time, or I made a different decision. But you can never look back. I mean, I've had a good career. Like I said, I can't complain.
Yeah, it's the old thing is if you tell the kids of today that, you wouldn't believe it. But when I say to people, see that station, that used to be a pirate station. That used to be a pirate station. People go, really? And, like Jackie obviously went and bought another station and put their name on it. KISS got a license, but there's all these stations now on DAB, Centre Force and people like that. And they're almost national stations now, a lot of them, I think, which is incredible, really, to see that's where it's all come from and where we are now with it.
Well, it's just it's so easy now. I mean, the point is, back in the day when I started off broadcasting from my bedroom or from Mark's flat, the criteria to get on air were just whether or not you could build a transmitter, which not many people could do. So there weren't that many stations on. Now, obviously, as soon as we finished recording this podcast, you could start streaming and you could be globally broadcasting globally. So there's no barrier to entry anymore.
I'll be broadcasting to the world tomorrow morning between 7 and 9 from this very room. So. And I'm on an FM station and I'm on an internet station as well. So like you say, it's incredibly easy. And like you say, people who build transmitters, I mean, I couldn't build transmitters. I'm not that technically minded, but I just bought mine from Martin. I probably still owe money for them now. So we move on from there. You've started, was it SBS you said it was?
Yeah.
Where do we go now? Bring us up to date to Pyers Easton and in the modern world.
Well, once I stopped working for the pirates, I started building transmitters for transmitters and radio links for legal broadcasters. I came up with some ideas and designs that improved the sound and loudness of radio stations. And I became, for a while in the early 90s, I was doing audio processing for various broadcasters. I been linked up with this company in France who had a product called an FM Sound Design, which was a 12-band audio processor. And I designed a stereo encoder. I say I designed. I had quite a lot of help from a chap called Trevor Brooke, who is quite well known in the sort of the radio world. He did Radio Fax amongst other things, but he was very helpful to me. But we'd come up with this system where you could have you weren't allowed at that time. You weren't allowed to equip your own equipment at the transmitters. For people like Capital Radio had to have all their equipment at the studio. And the IBA took care of everything else. But we came up with a design where you could do the processing at the studio, send it up to the transmitter, and with the stereo encoder that I put together, you could get the same loudness as if you had the processor at the transmitter. So to cut a long story short, I put Capital on the air with that, and it made them so loud that it blew everything else off the dial. I mean, by such a margin. And then I just went around the country selling processing. Then I did Radio 1 processing the same way, and that meant selling stereo encoders to the BBC for every single main transmitter site around the country. Because as I said, it enabled you to process at one end of the link. And these stereo encoders, it would effectively give you the same loudness as if you had the processor. Without going into too much technical detail, you get when you send audio from a processor down a line, which is effectively these lines that feed national networks, or even just to a single transmitter, you get overshoots, you get which would have caused overmodulation. But this stereo encoder enabled you to maintain a legal transmission and get the volume. So yeah, we sold these stereo encoders in the end to the BBC. There were about 300 and something of them.
So for all their regional transmitters and local radio stations and so on.
Yeah, the big 250 kilowatt main transmitter. I remember the first one to get it was Radio 1 from Rootham. And somewhere I've got a DAT recording of Simon Mayo saying, in the next song, during the next song, we're going to be switching over to a thing called an MPX5, which was the name of the stereo encoder. And I remember you could actually see it on the meters when they switched, because I'd set it all up at Rootham and it was all ready to go. And I was living in Hastings at the time, so I was listening to Rootham off air, and the meters shot up by about 3.5 dB, literally when they threw the switch, and then they rolled it out across the whole country.
And are we still listening through those now? If we're listening on FM,
I believe that they are. They have. I can't say for certain, but certainly as of a few years ago, they were mostly all on.
Because I live in BBC Radio Shropshire area, and I occasionally listen to them. So would I be listening through one of those?
Well, the local radio was a different thing again. Actually, it was only the main networks that were using them. The local radio ended up putting processors at each site, but that wasn't practical for the main networks because obviously there would have been so many of them. The idea was you had one processor at a broadcasting house, and you would feed all of the sites. But with local radio, where you had individual sites, you could actually locate the processors at the transmitters. So yeah, that was obviously a big thing. That was a massive. I remember getting a massive check from the BBC for those.
Yeah, well, I can see the Radio Shropshire transmitter mast from the room I'm sitting in now, so because I can see the top of the Wrekin. So and now you're Raycom.
It's a long story, but I when I was back in the pirate radio days, sort of rewinding to the early 80s, probably about 81. I used to go and buy Pi base stations from a guy called Ray Withers in Birmingham, and I used to drive up from London and fill the back of my car with these base stations. They were valves. That was the point when I started using valves, because I bought these really cheap, and I would just rewind the coils and tune them from like either high band or low band, tune them to FM band. And I got to know and became good friends with Ray, and he was involved with the first wireless mics that were used by bands. And I think it was the Rolling Stones Steel Wheels tour that were the first to use wireless mics on a live tour. Wireless mics were sort of in their infancy then. This was in 1990. And I remember I went on sort of part of the tour with the Rolling Stones, and I was adapting the radio mics that they used to be made by Sony, and I was adapting them so they sounded better. And I looked at the circuit; they'd made some mistakes with the design. I was improving it, and Keith Richards said I was his hero because I made his guitar sound really nice through these radio mics. And anyway, fast forward to 2002, Ray sadly passed away rather suddenly, and his family said, "Oh, are you interested in Raycom?" which was the name of his company, and so I took that on, and am now doing wireless mics and radio RF distribution systems, in-ear monitoring systems, basically audio and wireless, everything I've always done, really in my career, but much lower power levels. And so I'm putting together systems for Formula One and I'm a Celebrity, like putting all their RF, wide area coverage systems, so you can go anywhere. Like when they film I'm a Celebrity in the jungle in Australia. That all the RF over fiber links and wireless stuff. I don't design much anymore. It's just I'm buying in equipment and putting it together and making it work, basically from sort of international manufacturers.
That is fantastic. Well, from small beginnings, from your bedroom with an aerial out of the window, right through to stuff that everybody hears all the time on the television, on the radio. There we go. Pyers Easton, thank you ever so much for spending some time with us. What can I say? Transmitter builder extraordinaire.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I have to say, I've remembered more than I expected to remember. Actually, you've been very good at eking out my getting my grey matter going again, because I'm getting old and forgetful these days.
Like all of us, we're all anoraks really, and I just remember a lot of stuff about it in the day.
Well, my son's an anorak now. He's listening to shortwave, and so he's suddenly become interested in radio. So he knows what he's going to do. Well,
it's strange because that's obviously the family thing carrying on. You started off with in your dad's car tuning a radio, and your dad telling you about Radio Caroline, and now your son is now carrying on that tradition of listening to your father.
Anyway, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Pyres of the Airwaves podcast. If you enjoyed it and have a comment or would like to be a guest on a future episode, then feel free to email us at piratepod7080@gmail.com. That's piratepod7080@gmail.com. Our next episode will be out in a couple of weeks, where I chat to radio Jackie legend Nick Catford. If you don't want to miss that or any other future episode, then please click the subscribe button. Once again, thank you to the piratearchive.net and amfm.org.uk for their help in the production in this podcast. And I will see you all on the next episode.
Radio Nova, broadcasting on 1404 kilohertz of the medium wave band, 212 meters. Unfortunately, we've had to suspend your regular broadcasting. This is due to the post office requiring to test and inspect our equipment. We'll return you to normal broadcasting just as soon as we can.
This is a 1386 audio production.